If you touch him, you're making a mistake. I will lose my job before I let you harass an innocent man." The downtown Chicago grocery store was chaotic during the Tuesday lunch rush. Impatient professionals, long lines, expensive suits, everyone just rushing to get back to the office. A man stood at register 4. He didn't fit in. He wore a stained gray hoodie, a worn brown jacket, and scuffed work boots. He held a small basket with just a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. Basic things, survival things. He reached for his pocket to pay, but before he could pull his hand out, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "He stole it! I saw him put it in his jacket!" The woman behind him in line exploded. Her name was Tammy J. Torres, wearing a blazer that cost more than the cashier's car. "Are you serious right now? Security, search this vagrant. He's stealing right in front of us." The store manager rushed over, terrified of the VIP customer. "Sir, you need to empty your pockets immediately or I'm calling the police." Everyone was staring. Everyone was judging. The man looked down, humiliated. And then the cashier did something no one expected. Lydia, a young woman with short hair and a cross around her neck, stepped out from behind the counter. She physically blocked the manager, risking her paycheck, risking her survival to protect a stranger. "He didn't take anything," she said, her voice shaking but her eyes steady. "And if telling the truth costs me this job, then take it." Smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss justice served cold like this. And tell me in the comments, are you watching from New York, California, Florida, or Chicago? I'm always curious about where my audience is from. The view from the 52nd floor of the Findley Tower was supposed to be the best in Chicago. From the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of his penthouse, Justin Findley could see the entire city grid laid out like a circuit board of amber and gold, pulsating with energy. The Chicago River wound through the concrete canyons like a dark vein, reflecting the lights of the empire he had built. But as Justin pressed his hand against the cold glass, looking down at the millions of people living their lives, he didn't feel like a king looking at his kingdom. He felt like a prisoner looking through the bars of a gilded cage. The silence in the apartment was deafening. It was a heavy, expensive silence, the kind that only money could buy. Just 2 hours ago, this massive living room had been filled with the noise of what the tabloids called the event of the season. 50 of Chicago's most influential people had crowded into his home to celebrate the Findley Retail Group's record-breaking third quarter. There had been laughter, the clinking of crystal flutes, and the soft hum of a jazz quartet playing in the corner. Now the guests were gone. The catering staff had cleared away the trays of caviar and the half-empty bottles of Dom Perignon. The room was pristine again, returned to its museum-like state. Italian leather sofas that were too uncomfortable to sleep on, abstract sculptures that looked like twisted metal accidents, and a chandelier that cost more than the house he grew up in. It was perfect, it was beautiful, and it was completely empty. Justin walked over to the bar and poured himself a glass of water, ignoring the rows of rare scotch. He could still hear the echoes of the conversations from the party. They were always the same. "Justin, you're a genius," a tech investor named Marcus had said, slapping him on the back with a hand that felt like a claw. "That acquisition in the Midwest, diverse portfolio strategy, brilliant, absolutely brilliant." "You have such a vision, Justin," a woman in a red dress had whispered, leaning in close enough for him to smell her expensive perfume. "Most men with your money become soft, but you're intense." He couldn't even remember her name. Was it Sarah? Samantha? It didn't matter. She hadn't been looking at him. She had been looking at the reflection of her own ambition in his eyes. She saw a lifestyle, a black card, a ticket to the gala circuit. She didn't see the man who liked to watch old sci-fi movies on rainy Sundays or the guy who still preferred peanut butter on toast to filet mignon. They saw the CEO. They saw the net worth. They saw the suit. He loosened his tie, pulling the silk knot until it unraveled and tossed it onto the marble countertop. It felt like shedding a skin. That was the problem with his life, he realized. He was surrounded by people, yet he had never been more isolated. His phone contact list had 4,000 names in it. Business partners, board members, socialites, fixers, PR agents. But if he had a heart attack right now, right here on this Persian rug, who would care? The board would care about the stock price plummeting. The tabloids would care about the headline. But who would cry? "Sir?" The deep voice startled him. Justin turned to see Logan, his head of security and perhaps the only person in the building who didn't want something from him. Logan was a mountain of a man, standing by the elevator with his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable as always. "I thought everyone had left, Logan," Justin said, rubbing his temples. "The catering crew just cleared security, sir. I was doing a final sweep." "Rough night?" Justin let out a dry laugh. "The usual, 2 hours of people telling me how funny and smart I am, followed by 2 hours of them asking for capital." Logan nodded slowly. He had been with Justin for 6 years. He had seen the transformation. He had seen the bright-eyed entrepreneur turn into the guarded, cynical tycoon. "Mr. Vance left his card on the entry table. He said it was urgent regarding the charity gala." "Trash it," Justin said, waving his hand. "He doesn't care about the charity. He wants a photo op with the mayor." Justin walked back to the window. The reflection stared back at him, a handsome man in a $3,000 suit, with gray just starting to touch his temples. He looked successful. He looked powerful. He looked like he had won the game of life. But the reflection felt like a stranger. "Logan," Justin asked, without turning around, "do you think any of them actually like me?" The silence stretched for a moment. Logan didn't do polite lies. That was why he kept him around. "They like what you can do for you, sir. In this city, gravity pulls toward the heaviest wallet. It's just physics." "Physics," Justin repeated. "I'm tired of physics, Logan. I'm tired of being a gravity well for sharks." He looked down at his hands, soft hands, manicured hands. He remembered when they used to be calloused from stocking shelves in his father's hardware store. He missed those calluses. They felt real. This life, the penthouse, the parties, the constant applause, it felt like a performance he couldn't step out of. He was drowning in a sea of fake smiles and transactional relationships. "I need to know if it still exists," Justin murmured, almost to himself. "If what exists, sir?" "Decency," Justin said, turning around, a strange light entering his eyes. "Real, actual decency, kindness without a price tag, respect that isn't bought. Does anyone left in this world do the right thing just because it's the right thing? Or is everyone just calculating the ROI of their interactions?" Logan frowned slightly. "There are good people out there, Justin. They're just harder to find in your zip code." "Exactly," Justin said. The idea sparked in his chest, hot and sudden. It was crazy, it was reckless, but it was the first thing he had felt all night that wasn't boredom or disgust. "I need to see what happens when they don't see the CEO." He looked at the discarded tie on the counter. Then he looked at Logan. "Cancel my meetings for tomorrow morning." "Sir?" Logan raised an eyebrow. "You have the strategy review at the board." "Push it," Justin said, walking toward his bedroom with a sudden purpose in his stride. "I have a field inspection to do, but I'm not going as Justin Findley, the billionaire. I'm going to see my stores from the other side of the register." The penthouse was still empty, but for the first time in years, the emptiness didn't feel like a cage. It felt like the quiet before a storm. Justin Findley was done being the king on the hill. It was time to go down to the valley and see if there was any truth left to be found. The silence of the penthouse had shifted from oppressive to conspiratorial. Justin stood in the center of his walk-in closet, a space larger than his first apartment, surrounded by rows of Italian wool, Egyptian cotton, and bespoke leather. He ran his hand along the sleeve of a charcoal suit that cost $5,000. It was soft, impeccable, and utterly useless for what he needed to do. "Logan," Justin called out, his voice echoing slightly against the marble floors. "Do we still have that box? The one from the move 3 years ago? The don't throw away box?" Logan appeared in the doorway, his expression impassive, but his eyes tracking Justin's frantic energy. "The Sentimental Archive, sir? Storage Unit B, basement level. You haven't asked for it since the IPO. Get it, please." While Logan vanished to retrieve the item, Justin paced. The decision had crystallized in his mind with terrifying clarity. He wasn't just going to visit a store, he was going to erase Justin Findley, the billionaire. He needed to become a ghost in his own machine. He walked to the mirror, studying his face. The stress lines around his eyes were real, but the rest of him looked too polished, too well-fed. He needed to look like the world had chewed him up and spat him out. He stopped shaving. He ran his hands through his hair, messing up the $100 styling. When Logan returned, he was carrying a battered cardboard box sealed with yellowing tape. Justin cut it open with a letter opener that looked more like a dagger. Inside was a smell of old dust and nostalgia, a faded Cubs cap, a stack of Polaroids, and a gray hoodie stained with paint from the time he'd tried to renovate his mother's porch himself. "Perfect," Justin whispered. He pulled out the hoodie. It was rough against his skin, a stark contrast to the silk he'd been wearing all night. He stripped off his dress shirt and pulled the hoodie over his head. It smelled like the past. It smelled like a time when he had less money, but more hope. "Sir," Logan said, his voice dropping an octave, a sign of genuine concern. "If you walk into one of your flagship locations looking like that, security will likely stop you at the door. You built the protocols yourself." "That's the point, Logan. I need to know what happens when the protocols meet a person." Justin grabbed a pair of worn work boots from the bottom of the box. He'd kept them as a reminder of his roots, a humble brag prop he never actually looked at. Now they were essential. "I want to see the friction. I want to feel the resistance." "And what is the objective?" Logan asked, crossing his arms. "Market research? Employee compliance?" "Humanity," Justin said, lacing up the boots. "I want to see if anyone looks me in the eye when they think I have nothing to offer them. Tonight, at the party, I was a magnet. Everyone wanted a piece of me. Tomorrow, I want to be invisible, or worse, I want to be an inconvenience. I need to see if there's anyone left who treats an inconvenience like a human being." He stood up and looked in the mirror again. The transformation was jarring. The hoodie swallowed his frame, making him look smaller, wearier. The boots added a heaviness to his step. He didn't look like a CEO on retreat. He looked like a man who had just lost his last chance. "Which location?" Logan asked, accepting the reality of the situation. He moved into operational mode, pulling out a tablet. "The downtown branch," Justin said immediately. "The one on Michigan Avenue. It's the intersection of two worlds. You have the corporate crowd, the lawyers, the bankers, the people who were at my party tonight, shopping for their artisanal lunches. And then you have the staff, the commuters, the people barely holding on. If there's a class war happening in my company, that's the front line." "That store has the highest revenue in the district," Logan noted, "and the highest rate of customer complaints regarding loitering. The manager there, Mr. Henderson, runs a tight ship. He's ambitious. Reminds me of you 10 years ago." "Then he's the perfect person to test," Justin said grimly. "If he's building a culture of exclusion, I want to know. I built this company on the idea that everyone deserves quality, Logan. Findley Foods for the family. That was the slogan. If we've become just another velvet rope for the elite, I need to burn it down." He grabbed an old, scuffed wallet from the box. It was empty. He shoved it into his back pocket. "I'm going in with zero buying power," Justin said. "I'll take a few dollars in change, maybe a crumpled bill. Enough to look like I'm trying, not enough to look like I belong." "I'll trail you," Logan said, a statement, not a question. "I'll be in the store, casual dress, earpiece out. If things escalate..." "If things escalate, you do nothing," Justin interrupted, turning to face him. "If I am in physical danger, you stay back. I need to see the whole play. I need to see who kicks me when I'm down, and I need to see if anyone at all, offers a hand." "And if no one does?" Logan asked softly. Justin paused. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. If he walked into that store and found nothing but cruelty, if he confirmed that the world really was just physics, gravity pulling towards money, Then what was the point of the empire? What was the point of the penthouse? Then I'll know, Justin said, his voice barely a whisper. I'll know that the isolation isn't just in my head. I'll know that I'm not missing anything by staying in this tower. He walked to the window one last time, looking at the reflection of the man in the hoodie superimposed over the city lights. He looked like a stranger. For the first time in years, Justin Findley felt a genuine fear, not the fear of a stock crash or a hostile takeover, but the primal fear of rejection. He was about to walk into the lion's den without his armor. Have the car ready at 11 a.m., Justin said, turning away from the window. Tomorrow, the CEO is dead. Long live the customer. The elevator descent from the penthouse to the garage took 45 seconds. Usually, Justin spent this time checking email or adjusting his tie and the polished brass reflection of the doors. Today, he stood with his hands buried deep in the pocket of a gray hoodie that smelled faintly of mothballs and old paint. He refused to look at the reflection. He knew what he would see, a man who looked like he had lost everything. The hoodie was rough against his neck, the fabric pilling at the cuffs where he had nervously picked at it in the elevator. It was a physical shock to his system, a stark departure from the Egyptian cotton and cashmere that had swaddled him for the last decade. The boots were worse. They were heavy, scuffed, and unpolished, anchoring him to the floor with a weight that felt clumsy. He felt exposed, stripped of the invisible force fields that wealth provided. When the doors slid open, the air in the private garage was cool and smelled of concrete and gasoline. Logan was waiting by the black SUV, the rear door already open. For a split second, Logan hesitated. His eyes, usually trained to scan for threats, lingered on the paint stain near the hem of Justin's hoodie. It was a look of cognitive dissonance, the struggle to reconcile the billionaire boss with the man who looked like he had just been evicted. "We're clear, sir," Logan said, his voice neutral, though his posture remained stiff. Justin slid into the back seat. The leather was soft, the climate control set to a perfect 70 degrees. It felt wrong. He shouldn't be in this car. He was an imposter in his own vehicle. 2 blocks south of the Michigan Avenue location, Justin said, staring out the tinted window as the garage gate lifted. "Drop me near the alley entrance. I don't want anyone seeing a town car idling near the front doors." "Understood," Logan replied, easing the car out onto the street. The drive was silent. Chicago passed by in a blur of gray and steel. From the back seat of a luxury SUV, the city usually looked like a playground, a collection of assets and opportunities. But today, Justin watched the people. He saw a woman struggling with 3 grocery bags on a street corner. He saw a man sleeping on a heating grate wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days. He saw the invisible workforce, the delivery drivers, the sweepers, the people who kept the machine running while men like him sat in glass towers and took the credit. He felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just a costume. It was a surrender. He was voluntarily stepping off the pedestal, and he wasn't sure if he could climb back up if the world decided to stomp on him. "Sir," Logan said, breaking the silence as they navigated the heavy downtown traffic. "The security protocols at the flagship store are aggressive. Mr. Henderson has a zero-tolerance policy for loitering." "I know," Justin said quietly. "I signed the memo approving it." The irony tasted bitter. He had built the walls that he was now trying to breach. He had authorized the very policies that made people like him, people like the man he was pretending to be, feel unwelcome. "If he approaches you," Logan trailed off, his eyes meeting Justin's in the rearview mirror. "If he approaches me, he approaches a customer," Justin said, his voice hardening. "I want to see how he handles it. I want to see if Findley Foods is just a brand name or if it actually means something." The car slowed. They were in the shadow of the skyscrapers now, the streets crowded with the lunch rush. Logan pulled over to the curb near a service alley, safely out of sight of the store's main entrance. The engine hummed, a low vibration that Justin felt through the soles of his heavy boots. "Here we go," Justin whispered. He opened the door. The noise of the city rushed in, sirens, shouting, the rumble of a bus passing. It was loud and chaotic. He stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud. The wind whipped around the corner, biting through the thin fabric of the hoodie. He shivered, instinctively hunching his shoulders. "I'll be monitoring from the lot across the street," Logan said through the open window. "One signal, and I'm there." "Stay back, Logan. Let it play out." Justin shut the door. The SUV pulled away, merging back into traffic, its taillights disappearing into the sea of cars. For the first time in years, Justin finally was alone on a sidewalk. He stood there for a moment, just breathing. The air smelled of exhaust and fried food. He put his hands in his pockets and started walking toward the store. He passed a businessman in a navy suit who was shouting into his phone. The man didn't move aside. Justin had to step into the gutter to avoid a collision. The man didn't even look at him. He looked through him, as if Justin were a piece of urban furniture, an obstacle to be navigated. It had begun. The invisibility. Justin kept his head down, adopting the posture he had seen 1,000 times but never understood. The slump of the shoulders, the avoidance of eye contact, the defensive gait of a man who expects the world to be hostile. He rounded the corner and saw the sign, Findley Market. The green letters were bright and welcoming, promising freshness and quality. He reached into his pocket and fingered the few crumpled bills and loose change he had brought. It wasn't enough for a feast. It was barely enough for survival. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the cold and the fear, and walked towards the automatic doors. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was just a guy in a stained hoodie, hungry and tired, hoping the world wouldn't kick him while he was down. The screen of Lydia Lindgren's phone was cracked right down the middle, a jagged spiderweb of glass that perfectly bisected the red numbers on her banking app. $14.50. She stared at the digital display, sitting heavily on a hard plastic chair in the windowless break room of Findley Market. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, mocking hum, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the rows of gray metal lockers. $14.50. Her rent was due in 3 days, and the electric company had already sent the final, brightly colored warning notice. She closed her eyes, pressing the heels of her hands against them until she saw sparks of color in the dark. She just needed to make it to Friday. Friday was payday. If she picked up a double shift on Thursday, maybe she could negotiate a partial payment with the landlord. If she skipped the grocery store herself and just lived on the bruised produce the manager let the staff take home, she might be able to keep the lights on for another month. Her phone buzzed in her palm. A text popped up from an unknown number, the auto dialer from the medical collection agency that had been hunting her since her mother's brief, expensive hospital stay last year. Lydia swiped the notification away, her chest tightening with a familiar, suffocating panic. It was a physical weight, a cold stone sitting right on top of her lungs. She locked her phone and shoved it into her locker, slamming the metal door shut. There was no time to cry. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford, and crying didn't pay the light bill. Lydia stood up and smoothed down her light blue Findley Market polo shirt. She tied her black apron tight around her waist, double knotting the strings with practiced efficiency. She reached up and touched the small silver cross resting against her collarbone. It was a gift from her grandmother, the only piece of jewelry she owned that hadn't been pawned to cover a deficit. She held the cool metal between her fingers for a second, drawing a sharp, shaky breath, and then forced her facial muscles into the bright, neutral smile required by corporate policy. Pushing through the heavy, swinging doors, Lydia stepped out of the dingy break room and into the gleaming, overwhelming world of the flagship store. The contrast never failed to give her a mild case of whiplash. Behind those doors was the harsh reality of minimum wage and survival. Out here was a pristine temple of excess. Findley Market on Michigan Avenue was less of a grocery store and more of a curated culinary exhibition for Chicago's elite. The aisles were wide and spotless, lined with imported Italian olive oils that cost more than Lydia made in a 12-hour shift, towers of artisanal cheeses from France, and organic produce stacked in perfect, colorful, bruise-free pyramids. The air always smelled impossibly rich, a blend of freshly baked brioche from the bakery and roasted espresso beans from the in-store cafe. It was 11:45 a.m. The downtown corporate lunch rush was just beginning. The aisles were already filling up with the upwardly mobile. Men in tailored navy suits barked into Bluetooth earpieces while blindly tossing $10 bottles of cold-pressed juice into their baskets. Women in designer trench coats carefully inspected the marbling on Wagyu steaks. They moved with the confident, hurried, impatient energy of people who believed their time was the most valuable commodity on earth. To them, those price tags were just numbers, irrelevant details on the way to the checkout. To Lydia, those same price tags were stark reminders of a world she was strictly locked out of. Lindgren. Lydia stiffened, her customer service smile snapping into place before she even turned around. Mr. Henderson was the store manager, marching down the aisle, a clipboard pressed to his chest like a piece of tactical armor. He was a man composed entirely of sharp angles and nervous ambition, his tie perfectly knotted, his eyes constantly scanning the polished floor for imperfections. "Register 4 today, Lydia," Mr. Henderson said, barely looking at her as he swiped a finger over a display of imported jams, checking for dust. "And I need you moving fast today. The regional director is in the city this week, and we are not going to have lines backing up into the aisles. These people have 30 minutes for lunch, and they do not want to spend 15 of it staring at you trying to find a barcode on a salad." "Understood, Mr. Henderson. I'll keep it moving." "See that you do," he said, finally meeting her eyes. His gaze was cold, evaluating her purely as an operational liability. "And keep your head on a swivel. Security already had to chase a panhandler away from the south entrance this morning. We are catering to a premium demographic here. We don't tolerate loitering, and we certainly don't tolerate anyone making our VIPs uncomfortable. If you see someone who doesn't belong, you flag Logan's security team or myself immediately. Don't engage, just flag and remove." "Yes, sir." Mr. Henderson nodded sharply and marched off toward the bakery, barking an order at a teenager stocking baguettes. Lydia walked to the front of the store and slipped behind the counter of Register 4. She logged into the terminal, the screen blinking to life with her employee number. She wiped down the black conveyor belt with a sanitized cloth, her mind still doing the desperate, endless math of her survival. If I walk home in the rain instead of taking the L train, that's another $3 saved. She looked out at the sea of wealth rolling toward her checkout lanes. The first customer, a woman dripping in chunky gold jewelry and carrying a microscopic designer handbag, dropped a container of organic quinoa salad and a bottle of sparkling water onto the belt. "Hi, did you find everything okay today?" Lydia asked, her voice bright, cheerful, and entirely hollow. The woman didn't even look up from her phone screen. She just tapped her platinum credit card against the reader with an impatient flick of her wrist. Lydia bagged the salad, handing over the receipt to an empty air as the woman walked away without a word. The transaction was entirely devoid of humanity. It was mechanical. Lydia took a breath, resetting her smile as the next tailored suit stepped up to the belt. She didn't know that just a few blocks away, a man in a stained hoodie was walking toward her doors, about to test the very limits of this merciless world. She only knew that she had to keep scanning, keep smiling, and keep her head down if she wanted to survive. The automatic doors hissed open, and Justin Findley stepped into the climate-controlled perfection of his own creation. The air inside Findley Market was cool and scented with rosemary focaccia, a sharp contrast to the diesel fumes of the street. Immediately, he felt the change in atmosphere. As the CEO, he usually walked these floors with a phalanx of executives, pointing out display flaws while staff scrambled to look busy. Today, as a man in a stained hoodie and scuffed boots, he felt like a pathogen entering a sterile lab. He kept his head down, clutching the red plastic handbasket like a shield. He moved to the dry goods aisle, bypassing the towering displays of imported truffles and artisanal vinegars. He reached for a loaf of the store brand white bread, the kind he used to eat as a kid, the kind that cost $1.99. He added a jar of peanut butter and a single red apple. Survival things, the basics. As he turned the corner toward the front of the store, he felt the weight of the eyes on him. A security guard near the pharmacy section tracked his movement, hand hovering near his belt, eyes narrowed. A mother pulled her child closer as he passed, steering the stroller wide to avoid his orbit. It was a silent, suffocating rejection. He wasn't doing anything wrong, yet his mere presence is treated as a violation of the social contract. Justin made his way to register 4. The line was short, just one person finishing up. Behind the counter stood a young woman with short hair and tired eyes. He read her name tag, Lydia. She looked exhausted, her movements mechanical as she scanned a bottle of wine for the customer ahead of him. But there was something else there too, a quiet dignity in the way she handled the items, a softness in the way she handed the receipt over. He stepped up to the belt and began unloading his meager 3 items. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind him, sharp and impatient. It sounded less like a request and more like a command. Justin turned slightly. Standing directly behind him, invading his personal space with aggressive entitlement, was a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine editorial on corporate power. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than the rent on a downtown studio, and she was clutching a leather handbag with knuckles that shone with manicured polish. This was Tammy J. Torres. "You're blocking the card reader," Tammy snapped, her nose wrinkling slightly as she caught the scent of old mothballs radiating from Justin's jacket. "Some of us have actual places to be." "I'm sorry," Justin said softly, stepping forward and keeping his eyes on his boots. "I didn't mean to be in your way." "Well, you are," she huffed, rolling her eyes. She pulled her phone out of her bag, tapping furiously on the screen, but she didn't step back. She loomed over him, a physical manifestation of the pressure he was testing. "God, why is this store always so chaotic? You'd think with the prices they charge, they could keep the riffraff out." She didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the entire lane to hear. Justin flinched. He looked at Lydia. The cashier had stopped scanning. She was looking at Tammy, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she looked at Justin. The professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of sympathy. "Hi there," Lydia said to Justin, her voice raising a notch in warmth, deliberately ignoring the woman behind him. "Did you find everything you needed today, sir?" The "sir" hit Justin in the chest. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't the "sir" the security guard used before asking someone to leave. It was a genuine honorific. "Yes, thank you," Justin replied, his voice raspy. He placed the bread, the peanut butter, and the apple on the black belt. "Just these today." Lydia began to scan them. Beep, beep, beep. "Can we speed this up?" Tammy groaned from behind. She dropped a heavy basket of kale salads and sparkling water onto the belt with a loud clatter, pushing Justin's apple forward. "I have a conference call in 10 minutes, and I really don't have time to wait for whatever this is." Justin felt the heat rising in his neck. It wasn't anger, it was shame. A shame he hadn't felt in 30 years. He felt small. He felt like the dirt on the bottom of a shoe. "I'm going as fast as I can, ma'am," Lydia said, her voice tight but controlled. She didn't look at Tammy. She kept her eyes on Justin. "Your total is $8.40, sir." Justin reached into the front pocket of his hoodie. He fumbled for a moment, his fingers closing around the loose change and the crumpled $5 bill he had brought. He knew he had enough. He'd counted in the car, but his hands were shaking. The pressure of Tammy's glare behind him made him clumsy. He pulled out the fistful of coins and the bill, placing them on the counter. A few pennies rolled off the edge and clattered onto the floor. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Tammy sighed, a sound of pure disgust. "He's paying in change, of course he is. Look, do you need me to just pay for it? I'll pay for it if it gets you out of my face faster." It wasn't an offer of kindness. It was an offer of erasure. She wanted to buy his absence. Justin froze. He looked at the money on the counter, then back at Tammy. Her face was twisted in a sneer, her eyes cold and hard. This was his customer. This was the demographic his marketing team spent millions to target. "No thank you," Justin said, his voice quiet but firm. He bent down to pick up the pennies. "I can pay for it." "Leave it," Lydia said gently, her hand hovering near his. "It's okay. Take your time. We aren't in a rush." She shot a look at Tammy, a look that was dangerous for someone making minimum wage to give to a VIP. It was a look of protection. "Actually, I am in a rush," Tammy snapped, stepping closer, her expensive bag bumping against Justin's arm. "So if you could stop counting pennies and just move, that would be great." Justin stood up, clutching the pennies. He placed them on the counter. Lydia counted them out, her movements deliberate and calm, defying the frantic energy radiating from the woman behind her. $8.40 exact, sir. She bagged the bread and peanut butter with care, not throwing them in like trash. She handed the bag to Justin. You have a good day, sir. Stay warm out there. Thank you, Justin said. He meant it more than he had ever meant anything in a board meeting. He took the bag and turned to leave. As he did, he brushed past Tammy. She recoiled as if he were contagious, pulling her blazer tight around her. Finally, she muttered, stepping up to the register and slamming her rewards card down. You really need to talk to management about security, sweetie. It's making the shopping experience very unpleasant. Justin took a few steps away, but he didn't leave. He stopped near the end of the counter, pretending to adjust his boot. He needed to see this through. He needed to see what happened next. The air around the register was crackling with tension, and he had a feeling the storm was about to break. Justin didn't leave immediately. He moved a few feet away from the register, intending to head toward the exit, but the laces of his left boot had come loose, dragging across the polished concrete floor. It was a small thing, a messy detail that didn't belong in a place where everything was sleek and tucked away. He stepped to the side, near a towering display of imported Swiss chocolates and gourmet breath mints, trying to make himself as small as possible while he bent down to fix it. The plastic bag in his hand was slippery, the material thin and cheap. As he crouched, the bag swung awkwardly and his elbow clipped the edge of the impulse buy rack. A single bar of gold-roughed artisanal chocolate, priced at $12, teetered on the edge of the shelf and then clattered to the floor. The sound was sharp, a distinct thwack that cut through the low hum of the store. Justin froze. He felt the heat rush to his face again. He was clumsy. He was taking up space. He was everything he tried so hard not to be in his other life. Quickly, he reached down to retrieve the candy bar. His fingers, still cold from the walk outside and stiff with the tension of the last 10 minutes, fumbled with the sleek foil wrapper. He grasped it, intending to place it back on the shelf, but as he straightened up, he instinctively used his other hand to steady the loose change in his hoodie pocket, making sure the coins didn't spill out with his movement. It was a harmless motion, a split second of coordination, hand to pocket to secure his own money, hand to shelf to replace the dropped item. But to eyes looking for a crime, it looked like a transfer. I saw that! The voice was a shriek, sudden and piercing, slicing through the ambient noise of the checkout lanes like broken glass. Justin flinched, nearly dropping the chocolate bar again. He turned to see Tammy J. Torres pointing a manicured finger directly at his chest. She had stopped unloading her cart, her face twisted into a mask of triumphant outrage. She looked like a hunter who had finally flushed her prey. "Excuse me," Justin stammered, holding the gold bar in plain sight. "Don't play dumb with me," Tammy yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I saw you. You put something in your pocket. You think you knocked that display over as a distraction and you shoved something in your jacket." The store went deathly quiet. The gentle beep of scanners stopped. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Every head in the vicinity turned toward Register 4, the business executives, the mothers, the security guard by the door. Justin stood at the epicenter of their attention, a man in a stained hoodie holding a chocolate bar, looking for all the world like a caught thief. "Ma'am, no," Justin said, his voice trembling slightly. He held up the chocolate bar. "I just knocked this over. I was putting it back." "Liar!" Tammy stepped away from the counter, abandoning her transaction to confront him. She loomed over him, fueled by the righteous indignation of someone who believes they are the moral guardian of the neighborhood. "I know your type. You think the rules don't apply to you because you're struggling. Well, guess what? Stealing is stealing." She whirled around, scanning the store for backup. "Manager! Where is the manager? We have a shoplifter at Register 4. Mr. Henderson appeared almost instantly, materializing from the aisles like he had been summoned by the sound of a falling profit margin. He looked frantic, his eyes darting between Tammy, the VIP, the spender, the status symbol, and Justin, the liability, the stain, the problem. "Mrs. J. Torres, what seems to be the trouble?" Anderson asked, his voice dripping with conciliatory syrup as he approached her, effectively putting his back to Justin. This man, Tammy pointing a shaking finger at Justin's face, just pocketed merchandise. I saw him. He knocked over the display and slipped something into that disgusting jacket of his. Henderson turned slowly to face Justin. The customer service mask was gone. In its place was the cold, hard sneer of authority dealing with a nuisance. He didn't ask Justin for his side of the story. He didn't look at the chocolate bar Justin was still holding, trying to return it to the shelf. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the boots. He looked at a profile of a man who didn't belong. "Sir," Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a threat wrapped in corporate polite speak, "is this true?" "No," Justin said, and he realized with a jolt of horror that he sounded guilty. His voice was weak. He was defensive. "I dropped this bar. I was putting it back." "Liar," Tammy interjected, crossing her arms. "Check his pockets. I bet you find half the aisle in there." "Sir," Henderson said, stepping closer, encroaching on Justin's space just as Tammy had, "I'm going to have to ask you to empty your pockets. Now." "You can't do that," Justin said, clutching his plastic bag. "I haven't done anything wrong. You have cameras. Check the cameras." "I don't need to check the cameras when I have a witness," Henderson snapped, his patience evaporating. He signaled to the security guard, who was already moving toward them, hand on his belt. "We can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. Empty the pockets, put the bag on the floor." Justin looked around the circle of faces. Disgust, amusement, pity, but mostly relief. They were relieved it wasn't them. They were relieved that the system was working, that the antibody was removing the virus from their sterile environment. He looked at Tammy, who was smiling now, a tight, cruel smile of victory. She wasn't just protecting the store, she was enforcing a hierarchy. He was trapped. If he emptied his pockets, he proved his innocence, but he lost his dignity. He submitted to the lie that he was lesser. If he refused, he would be dragged out in handcuffs. "I said," Henderson barked, reaching out as if to grab Justin's arm, "empty the pockets." Justin's grip on the chocolate bar tightened. He was about to speak, to reveal who he was, to end this charade and burn Henderson's career to the ground. But before he could open his mouth, a movement caught his eye. Behind the counter, Lydia had stopped scanning. Her hands were still. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing with a sudden terrifying intensity. She stepped out from behind the register, moving not like an employee, but like a shield.
"Mr. Henderson, don't touch him." The words rang out across the front of the store, clear and startlingly loud. They didn't sound like a request, they sounded like a command. Mr. Henderson froze, his hand inches from Justin's shoulder. He turned his head slowly, his expression shifting from aggressive authority to baffled irritation. It was as if a vending machine had suddenly started giving him financial advice. Lydia Lindgren had stepped fully out from behind the counter of Register 4, abandoning her post. She stood between the manager and the man in the hoodie, her small frame vibrating with a terrified but resolute energy. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles white against the dark fabric of her apron. "Excuse me, Miss Lindgren?" Henderson said, his voice dripping with dangerous condescension. "I don't recall asking for your input. Get back to your register, you have a line." "I said don't touch him," Lydia repeated, her voice shaking but gaining strength. She looked at Justin, her eyes scanning his face for a split second, checking for fear, offering reassurance, before turning back to her boss. "He didn't steal anything. I was watching the whole time. He dropped the chocolate bar. He picked it up. It's right there in his hand. He was checking his pocket for loose change because he was worried he wouldn't have enough." "Oh, please," Tammy scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard it looked painful. She adjusted her designer bag on her shoulder, looking at Lydia with the same disdain she had shown Justin. "Of course you'd stick up for him. Birds of a feather, right? You people always cover for each other." Lydia flinched at the insult, a flush of red creeping up her neck, but she didn't step back. "I am not covering for anyone," Lydia said, her voice rising. "I am telling you the truth, and the truth is that this man has done nothing but try to buy bread and peanut butter while being harassed."
Harassed, Henderson stepped closer to Lydia, invading her space, using his height to intimidate her. You are treading on very thin ice, Lydia. This is a valued customer. This man is a vagrant who is disrupting our business. Now step aside so security can do their job, or you can join him on the street. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The entire store was watching. The business executives in line were checking their watches, annoyed by the delay but fascinated by the drama. The security guard, Logan, though Henderson didn't know his name, was watching from the entryway, his hand moving away from his belt as he observed the cashier's defiance. Justin watched Lydia. He saw the calculation in her eyes. He saw the fear. He knew better than anyone what this job meant to her. He had seen the cracked phone screen. He had seen the way she counted the pennies. He knew she needed this paycheck to survive the week, and yet she was throwing it all away for a stranger who had nothing to offer her but trouble. "Go back to the register, Lydia," Justin whispered, his voice raspy. "It's not worth it. I'll handle this." "No," Lydia said, not looking at him. She looked straight at Henderson. "It is worth it, because he is a human being, not a thief, and he is certainly not a vagrant. He is a customer, and you are treating him like garbage because he isn't wearing a suit." "I am treating him like a suspect because he was observed shoplifting," shouted Henderson, losing his composure. "And you are insubordinate. I am the manager of this store, and I say he gets searched." "Then you'll have to search me, too," Lydia said, her voice trembling again, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "I said search me, too," Lydia said, her voice trembling again, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "Because if standing up for an innocent man makes me a suspect, then I guess I'm guilty. You want to check his pockets? Go ahead, but you better check mine and everyone else's in this line, because the only person here who has actually done something wrong is her." She pointed a shaking finger at Tammy. "She has been rude, abusive, and hateful since the moment she walked in. She accused him because she didn't like how he looked. That's profiling, Mr. Henderson, and it's wrong." "You little—" Tammy stepped forward, her face turning a blotchy red. "I will have your job for this. Do you know who I am? I spend more in this store in a week than you make in a year." "I don't care who you are," Lydia said, tears finally spilling over. "I care about what is right." Henderson's face went purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He had lost control of his floor. He had lost control of his staff, and he was being humiliated in front of a VIP. "That is it," Henderson spat. "You are done, Lindgren. Fired. Immediately. Take off that apron and get out of my store. Security, escort both of them out." Lydia didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply reached behind her back and untied the knot of her apron. Her hands were shaking violently now, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. She pulled the black fabric over her head, folding it neatly because that was who she was, someone who respected the work even when the work didn't respect her, and placed it on the counter next to the register. She looked at Justin. She looked devastated. She had just lost her lifeline. She had just lost her rent money. But she offered him a small, sad smile. "I'm sorry," she whispered to him. "I tried." Justin felt a lump in his throat the size of a fist. He had come here looking for decency, expecting to find nothing. Instead, he had found courage. He had found a diamond in the rough. He had found someone willing to burn their own life down to keep a stranger warm. As the security guard approached, not Logan, but the store's uniformed hire, Justin straightened up. The slump in his shoulders vanished. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a cold, hard steel. He wasn't the man in the hoodie anymore. He was the man who signed the checks. He reached out and gently placed a hand on Lydia's arm, stopping her from walking away. "You don't need to apologize, Lydia." His voice had changed. It was deeper, resonant, commanding. It carried the weight of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. "Mr. Henderson," Justin said, "before you escort me out, I suggest you ask your head of security to come over here, the real head of security." Henderson blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? I'm calling the police."
"You can do that," Justin said calmly, reaching into the hidden inner pocket of his hoodie, the one Tammy thought contained stolen goods. He wasn't pulling out a weapon. He wasn't pulling out a stolen chocolate bar. He was pulling out a leather wallet and inside, a badge that very few people had ever seen in person.
Justin withdrew his hand from the hoodie pocket, the movement slow and deliberate, contrasting sharply with the chaotic energy that had filled the space just moments before. He didn't produce a stolen chocolate bar. He didn't produce a weapon. He held out a slim black leather case, flipping it open with a flick of his wrist. Inside, resting against velvet, was a heavy card made of brushed titanium. It caught the harsh fluorescent lights of the store, the same lights that had made Lydia's skin look pale and Justin's hoodie look dingy, and reflected them back with a cold, undeniable authority. Etched into the metal were three things: the company logo, a security chip, and a name. Justin Findley, Chief Executive Officer. "Read it, Mr. Henderson," Justin said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Out loud. Henderson blinked, his brain struggling to process the visual information. He squinted at the card, then up at Justin's face, then back at the card. The disconnect was too great. The man in the stained hoodie and the name on the building couldn't be the same person. It was a prank. It was a trick. This is a fake," Henderson stammered, though his hands had started to tremble. He looked around for support, his eyes wild. "It's a prop. You printed this out. You think you can come into my store, disrupt my customers, and then play games? Security, get him out of here now." The uniformed store guards took a step forward, reaching for his baton. "Stand down." The command came from the entrance, cutting through the air like a whip crack. Logan stepped out of the shadows of the vestibule. He moved with the fluid, terrifying grace of a predator, closing the distance to register 4 in seconds. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but the earpiece coiling down his neck and the way he carried himself screamed federal-level protection. He stepped smoothly between the store guard and Justin, placing a hand on the guard's chest. It was a gentle touch, but the guard stopped as if he'd hit a brick wall. "If you touch him," Logan said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, "you will be arrested for assaulting the owner of this company. Step back." The store guard looked at Logan, then at Henderson, and took 2 large steps backwards, raising his hands in surrender. Henderson's face went from purple to a ghostly, chalky white. He looked at Logan, a man he vaguely recognized from corporate security memos, and then he looked at Justin again. The scruffy beard, the tired eyes, but behind them the same intensity he had seen in the annual shareholders' video address. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a sickening thud. Mr. Findley?" Henderson whispered. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. "That's right," Justin said, snapping the badge case shut. He handed the plastic bag of bread and peanut butter to Logan, who took it as respectfully as it were the crown jewels. Justin straightened his spine, and suddenly the hoodie didn't look like rags anymore. It looked like a costume he was bored of wearing. "I came here today to see how my flagship store treats its most vulnerable customers. And I have to say, Mr. Henderson, you have exceeded my expectations, just not in the way you hoped." The silence that descended on the store was absolute. It was heavier than the silence of the accusation. This was the silence of a guillotine blade hovering at the top of its arc. Tammy J. Torres, who had been watching the exchange with a sneer of impatience, finally realized the wind had changed direction. She looked at Justin, her eyes widening as she took in the deference Logan was showing him. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Wait," Tammy said, her voice shrill but wavering. You own the store?" Justin turned to her. The warmth he had shown Lydia was gone, replaced by a glacial indifference. "I don't just own the store, ma'am. I own the supply chain that brought that kale to your basket. I own the land this building sits on, and I own the policy manual that Mr. Henderson just violated to appease your ego." "Well," Tammy let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, clutching her hand back tighter. This is ridiculous. You're dressed like a bum. How are we supposed to know? You can't blame us for being suspicious. I was just trying to protect your property."
Protect my property. Justin stepped closer to her, and for the first time, Tammy J. Torres took a step back. You weren't protecting anything. You were bullying a man because you didn't like his shoes. You humiliated him because it made you feel powerful. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to have him arrested for a crime you invented. I thought I saw, Tammy stammered, looking around for an ally, but the other shoppers had instinctively backed away from her, creating a wide circle of isolation. You saw what you wanted to see, Justin cut her off. You saw a target. He turned his back on her, dismissing her as if she were no longer relevant, and faced Henderson. The manager was sweating profusely now, a distinct sheen of panic on his forehead. And you, Justin said, his voice deceptively calm, Mr. Henderson, you are the captain of this ship. Your job is to ensure fairness and service. Instead, you allowed a customer to dictate security protocols based on bias. You threatened a man without evidence, and worst of all, Justin turned to look at Lydia. She was standing by the counter, her hands still trembling, her apron folded neatly beside her. She looked like she was in shock, staring at Justin as if he were an alien who had just landed. Worst of all, Justin continued, his voice softening with genuine respect, you fired the only person in this building who actually understands the values of this company. Sir, I was just trying to maintain order, Henderson wheezed, wiping his brow with a shaking hand. She was insubordinate. She yelled at a VIP. She protected a human being, Justin corrected him. She risked her livelihood to defend a stranger who had nothing to offer her. She put her rent money on the line for the truth. That is not insubordination, Mr. Henderson. That is leadership, something you clearly know nothing about. Justin looked at Logan. Get the paperwork started. Already done, sir, Logan replied. Justin looked back at Henderson. You're fired. Pack your office. You have 10 minutes before your access card is deactivated, and don't bother asking for a reference. Henderson opened his mouth to beg, to explain, but one look from Logan sealed his throat shut. He slumped, defeated, the corporate ambition draining out of him, leaving just a small, scared man in a cheap suit. And you, Justin said, turning back to Tammy. You can't fire me, Tammy spat, trying to regain some shred of dignity. I'm a customer. I spend thousands here. Not anymore. Your money is no longer good at Findley Market. In fact, you are banned from this location and every other location in the state. If you set foot on my property again, you will be trespassing. Security will escort you out. You can't do this, Tammy shrieked, her face blotchy with rage. I'm going to sue. I'm going to tell everyone. Go ahead, Justin said, gesturing to the security cameras that dotted the ceiling. We have the whole thing in 4K. I'd be happy to release the footage to the news. Socialite harasses homeless man gets banned by CEO. I think the internet would love that headline, don't you? Tammy paled. She looked at the cameras, then at the crowd of shoppers who were now holding up their own phones, recording her humiliation. She grabbed her bag, abandoned her cart of unpaid groceries, and stormed towards the exit, her heels clicking a frantic retreat on the linoleum. The automatic doors hissed shut behind her, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Justin took a deep breath, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving him with a sharp clarity. He turned to the counter where Lydia stood. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of awe and confusion. He walked over to her, ignoring the stares of the crowd. He wasn't the CEO anymore, and he wasn't the bum in the hoodie. He was just a man who had finally found what he was looking for. Lydia, Justin said gently. Lydia's voice was barely a whisper. You're the guy on the posters in the break room. I am, Justin admitted, a small apologetic smile touching his lips. I'm sorry I deceived you. I needed to know the truth. You let me get fired, she said, not with anger, but with disbelief. I'm sorry about that too. It had to play out, Justin said. He reached out and picked up her folded apron from the counter. He held it out to her, not as a uniform, but as an offering. Lydia looked at the apron, then at the titanium badge still in Justin's other hand. The distance between their worlds had just collapsed into the space of a checkout counter.
The rooftop garden of the Findley Market flagship store on Michigan Avenue was usually reserved for VIP tastings and corporate mixers, a place where the city's elite sipped Prosecco and looked down on the bustling streets below. But tonight, the space had been transformed into something that baffled the society columns and delighted the neighborhood. There were no velvet ropes, there were no security guards checking bank balances at the door. The air didn't smell of stiff lilies and desperation. It smelled of fresh baking bread and warm vanilla, drifting up from the ovens below. 1 year had passed since the incident at Register 4. The guest list was a logistical nightmare for the event planners and a triumph for Justin. On the left side of the aisle sat the board of directors of Findley Retail Group, men and women in $5,000 suits who checked their watches and looked mildly terrified of the buffet. On the right side sat the Register 4 regulars, the stock boys, the janitorial staff, the other cashiers, and even the security guard who had once been ordered to arrest the groom. They wore their Sunday best, laughed loudly, and ate the hors d'oeuvres with genuine appetite rather than polite nibbles. Justin stood at the altar, which was framed by a simple arch of wildflowers. No imported roses, just the resilient blooms that grew in Chicago's parks. He wasn't wearing the stained hoodie today, but he wasn't wearing a tuxedo either. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no tie, looking less like a tycoon and more like the man he had discovered that Tuesday afternoon. He looked out at the sea of faces. A year ago, he had stood in his penthouse feeling like a prisoner of his own success. He had believed the world was governed by the physics of greed, where gravity only pulled toward the heaviest wallet. Tonight, looking at Logan standing beside him as his best man and seeing the mix of people mingling in the golden hour light, he knew he had broken the law of gravity. "She's coming," Logan whispered, nudging him. The music started. It wasn't a string quartet playing pockable. It was a local jazz trio playing a slow, soulful rendition of a song that drifted sweetly on the evening wind. Lydia Lindgren stepped out from the glass doors. The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. She wasn't dripping in diamonds. She wasn't wearing a dress that cost a year's salary. She wore a gown of simple white silk that caught the light like a pearl. Her hair was still short, framing her face, and around her neck hung the same simple silver cross she had worn the day she risked her livelihood for a stranger. She walked down the aisle not with the tentative steps of someone entering a world she didn't belong in, but with the grace of a woman who had built her own bridge to get there. She walked alone. She didn't need anyone to give her away. She had already given herself to the truth a long time ago. When she reached the altar, Justin took her hands. They were warm. They were real. Friends, family, and valued colleagues, the officiant, an old friend of Lydia's from her church, began, smiling at the eclectic crowd. "We are here to celebrate a merger, not of assets, but of hearts." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, easing the tension between the two sides of the aisle. When it was time for the vows, Justin took a small piece of paper from his pocket. His hands, which used to sign billion-dollar acquisition deals without a tremor, were shaking slightly. "Lydia," Justin started, his voice thick with emotion. "A year ago, I walked into this building disguised as a man with nothing. I was looking for proof that decency still existed. I was looking for someone who would see the human being beneath the hoodie. Everyone else saw a vagrant. You saw a soul. Everyone else saw a problem to be removed. You saw a person to be protected. You stood between me and the world, and you offered up everything you had, your job, your security, your reputation, to save a man you didn't even know. You smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. You bought my bread and peanut butter when I couldn't. Today, I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to pay you back. Not with money, because I know that's not what you value, but with truth. I promise to be the man you defended. I promise to never let the noise of the world drown out the quiet decency you taught me. And I promise, no matter what happens, to always have exact change." Lydia laughed, a sound that broke the last of the formality in the air. She wiped a tear from her cheek and took a breath. "Justin," she said, her voice steady and clear, the same voice that had silenced a screaming manager.
When I saw you that day, I didn't see a billionaire testing his employees. I just saw a guy who looked like he was having the worst day of his life, and I knew what that felt like." She squeezed his hands. "You showed me that power isn't about who can shout the loudest or who has the most expensive back. It's about who is willing to listen. You turned this company upside down to make it right. You gave me a voice when I was just a number. I promise to keep you grounded. I promise to remind you that the view from the street is just as important as the view from the penthouse. And I promise to love the man in the hoodie just as much as the man in the suit, maybe more." "Do you have the rings?" the officiant asked. Logan stepped forward. He didn't open a velvet box. Instead, he handed Justin a small, clear bag containing 2 simple gold bands. They weren't flashy, they were sturdy. Justin slid the ring onto Lydia's finger. "With this ring, I thee wed." Lydia slid the matching band onto his. "With this ring, I thee wed." "By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Justin leaned in, and as their lips met, the rooftop erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was a roar. The board members were clapping, the stock boys were whistling, and somewhere in the back, someone popped a bottle of champagne that sprayed foam into the twilight. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, the sun began to set over Chicago, painting the skyline in hues of purple and gold. They passed the reception tables, where the centerpieces weren't floral arrangements, but artistic displays of artisanal bread and jars of gourmet peanut butter, a cheeky nod to the transaction that started it all. Justin looked at his wife. She wasn't just a cashier who got lucky, she was the moral compass of his life. He looked at the guests mingling now, the lines between management and labor blurring as the music picked up tempo. He realized he hadn't just found a wife, he had found a way to heal the fractured world he lived in. He stopped at the end of the aisle, pulling Lydia close for one more moment of quiet before the reception swallowed them whole. "You know," Justin whispered, leaning against her head, "I technically still owe you $8.40. Lydia smiled, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "Put it on my tab, CEO. You've got a lifetime to work it off." And for the first time in the history of Findley Market, the richest man in the room wasn't the one with the biggest bank account. It was the man holding the hand of the woman who had saved him with nothing but a little bit of change and a whole lot of courage. The isolation was over, the merger was complete, and the stock price of humanity had just hit an all-time high.